Thank you. Thanks for that. Should we put them together?
You need to keep those together.
Okay.
Will you be able to see if you do that?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that very kind introduction. In the interest of due disclosure, I have to say I wrote every word of it myself. So over the next half hour, I'll talk about security, its various dimensions, how prepared are we for the security threats we face, what we can do to defend ourselves better, get more bang for the buck, as they call it. What warnings might you get for when things are about to go badly wrong, when you could possibly be faced with the possibility of a war? I'll talk about Make in India and defense. Finally, if anybody is still awake at the end of it, we'll do about half an hour of question and answers. I'll sort of address any questions relating to the subject of security. Now, security analysts who evaluate the big questions of India's defense fall broadly into two camps. What I call the 20th century camp, which tends to view security in very narrow statist terms, revolving around threats to the nation. And basically, they love to use the word national security. And the 21st century camp, as I call them, which views security in a much broader sense, revolving not just around threats to the nation, but also to individual and public security, and it ranges across a very wide spectrum of conflict. Now, the 20th century national security analysts believe that the most serious threat to India is what is broadly called a 2.5 front war. Now, this involves China and Pakistan acting in concert against India, and also with us facing the possibility of a stepped-up insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir and the northeast. So 2 fronts, Pakistan, China, and half a front, the insurgency. Now for this, obviously, India must be prepared to fight on all fronts simultaneously. We obviously need to spend vast sums of money, in the lakhs of crores, on a large standing military. Now the belief in this school of thought seems to be that if you have a huge military that is trained and equipped for war, we're all going to be safe. Meanwhile, the 21st century strategists, that's the second category, do not disregard entirely the prospect of a 2.5 front war, or I should say at least a 1 front war, but they don't consider that the primary threat. They believe that in an interconnected, globalized world, India's primary problem is not conventional war. More immediate danger stems from a new range of 21st century threats that transcend border and state-to-state conflicts. Now, these strategists note that despite maintaining a clear conventional superiority against Pakistan in the military realm, we continue losing lives to terrorism, like in Pathankot, Gurdaspur recently. Whether in Mumbai or in Delhi, citizens live under the threat of a terror attack at any time. There are large parts of the country that are unsafe to live in, Delhi, for example, but also Jammu and Kashmir and Manipur. We could lose our identity in a cyber attack. We could lose all our life savings. So it's a paradox. We have a 1 million-man military at the border, but there are numerous security threats that entirely bypass the border. The threat of terror is only the most overt of them. Other security threats include forcing the imposition of draconian laws like AFSPA, which are an assault on our freedom, at least on the freedom of many people who are subject to those acts. Then there are a whole range of asymmetric hybrid threats, as they are called by strategists: cyber attack, narcotics trade, the spread of counterfeit currency. There also are a range of politico-economic problems that stem from various social problems, the ongoing Jat agitation, for example, stemming from employment insecurity. Now, these create a whole range of security problems that are well beyond the military. And if you were to ask anyone from North India, certainly anyone from Delhi, if they thought they were more in threat or in danger to being stoned to death on a highway or burnt in their car, or they feel more threatened by a war with Pakistan or China, I can assure you that 10 out of 10 would say the former. So the 20th century idea of security that we often use in India is a limited one. It does not take into account the non-state threats that are the real problems of our time, but even looking at the statist calculations there are serious problems with the calculations over there. Now, the first and foremost is that this 2.5 front war is a maximalist, worst case calculation that's founded less on possibilities and probabilities of events happening than on mathematical tabulation. Strategists of this school and most government officials and generals and people within the military tend to be from this school, seem to believe that you tabulate all the threats, 1, 2, 3, 4, add them all up and presume that they are all going to happen simultaneously, and national security then gets defined in terms of creating the resources needed to tackle that completely unlikely eventuality. So most of the figures that we set for ourselves, for example, this one that you often hear on television, that the Air Force must have 45 fighter squadrons, the Navy must have 160 warships. These are all based on the assumption of a 2.5 front war. And the anguish that we create for ourselves, that we're down to 34 squadrons now, what's going to happen? My God. They stem from the fact that we've created such a challenging datum for ourselves that it's really difficult to meet it. Now, the fact is that through several wars that India has fought, 1947-48 in Kashmir, 1962 against China, 1965-71 against Pakistan, the Kargil crisis, there was never any meaningful coordination between Pakistan and China at all. Just a few sort of words of support at the most, a little bit of saber rattling, no operational support, certainly no shots fired. Nor was such a sort of cooperation or coordination evident in a range of crises that we've had over the years. The 1967 border clash at Nathula, a range, I can go on naming them, the Sumdorongchu incident, the brass tacks exercise, the parliament attack more recently, and after which we had Operation Parakram, and then, of course, the Mumbai attacks of 26/11. No operational coordination between Pakistan and China. So furthermore, it's the task of foreign policy and diplomacy to ensure that India doesn't find itself in a two-front war. The Modi government, like the Manmohan government before it, follows the foreign policy of multi-alignment, which basically means India cultivates friendly relations with every major power on a bilateral basis, and each of these relationships is leveraged by the combined weight of the others. Yet we base our security and military policy, and it is important to note this, on the assumption that our foreign policy has entirely failed. Now, this dissonance and insecurity is evident from the way that we are building up forces against China right now. Over the last decade, we've added 4 new divisions. That's about 60,000 to 80,000 troops, depending on how you do the calculations, to reinforce 8 divisions that were already deployed against China. 2 new armored brigades, 500 military vehicles, all of this costs. The Indian Air Force has put Sukhoi 30 fighters into Tezpur and Chabua. It will soon site them in Hashimara. The IAF is upgrading 5 more air bases, a string of advanced landing grounds along the border. You know, there's something called the security-insecurity paradox. The more security you create for yourself, the more insecurity you're creating for somebody else, who doesn't view your actions as defensive, but as a threat to themselves. So essentially, we run the risk every time we step up military escalation or we step up deployment of violating this basic principle. So as you see, we are militarizing the Eastern Himalayas in a fairly big way. Now, this increase in numbers is happening. The numbers I'm talking about is of personnel, of increases to an already 1.2 million person army, is happening at a time when our military payroll, our salaries for our soldiers, is already larger than the equipment procurement. The equipment procurement for this year, after the failures, multiple failures of procurement, will be barely about 65,000 crore rupees. Salaries will be in the region of 100,000 crore rupees. Add to that the 7th Pay Commission recommendations. Add to that one rank, one pension, which will take the military manpower costs up even further. You're basically in a country of cheap manpower and expensive weaponry, considering that we're importing most of it. we are still spending more on the manpower. So this is happening because we are painting our own security requirements in this paradigm of eternal threat. So why then are we spending so much money to build the capacity to take on China and Pakistan together? Hey, are there some delusions of United States-like requirements? The United States for many years, right through the Cold War and even after that, has always structured its military on the belief that it must be able to fight 2 major wars anywhere on the globe and 1 minor war simultaneously. Are we sort of trying to rival that? Are we heading in that path? The fact is that what we are spending on defense, and that's 2,46,727 crore rupees for this current year, $36.5 billion is already 13.85% of government spending, 1.75% of our GDP. Every rupee spent on defense, and it must sound strange for me as an analyst to be arguing for lesser spending on defense, but it's a rupee that's denied to education, healthcare, food, employment creation, and so on. So you might well ask, as so many well-fed and well-cared-for people tend to do, what is more important than national security? Now, why should we hesitate in spending on defending the country? But you would be guilty then of looking only at the 20th century version of security, not at the 21st century version. You would have failed to note that all those 21st century threats, terrorism in our heartland, internal disaffection, caste violence, unemployment, these are all security threats. They are tackled head on not by defense spending, but by spending on these other sectors that we talked about. Which means that in the broader definition of national security, your spend on healthcare, employment creation, and most of all education is a part of your national security spend. So some people in this room might already be wondering, am I some left-wing nut job who believes that setting up health clinics in Dantewada and lighting candles in Vaga will make India more secure? Well, here's the bad news. I'm not alone in what I'm saying. This is what Prime Minister Modi had to say as recently as December 15th, 2015, when he addressed the senior-most commanders of the Army, Navy, and Air Force on board the INS Vikramaditya, the aircraft carrier, off Bombay. His words, I quote, "At a time when major powers are reducing their forces and rely more on technology, we're still constantly seeking to expand the size of our forces. Modernization and expansion of forces at the same time is a difficult and unnecessary goal." But guess what? Nobody's listening. Since we don't have a tri-service commander, the 3 service chiefs are only looking after the interests of their respective services. And in anybody who has seen a sort of a budget battle between different departments, and I'm sure everyone in this room does that for a living, knows that this is not a healthy planning situation. Mr. Modi knows this too. He has a face-to-face meeting with each one of his military chiefs separately every month. On the Vikramaditya, he also said, and I quote, "We look to our armed forces to prepare for the future. And it cannot be achieved by doing more of the same or preparing prospective plans based on outdated doctrines and disconnected from financial realities. Our forces and our government need to do more to reform their beliefs, doctrines, objectives, and strategies." Nobody's listening. We still continue doing exactly what we were always doing. Now, I already talked to you about budget battles between the 3 services. It's not just budget battles. Anybody who studied the history of the Second World War, if you ask them who was the Pacific campaign fought between, the ones who don't know will say it was fought between America and Japan. But the actual ones who do know will say it was fought between Admiral King of the US Navy and Douglas MacArthur of the US Army. They were constantly at loggerheads, often to the detriment of American national security and at the costs of lives of tens of thousands of US soldiers, to do operations in a particular way that suited the Army, or rather the Navy, or, it was a battle throughout between these two. And it's the same within the Indian military. To adjudicate between the 3 services, you absolutely need a tri-service chief who does the long-range planning, who balances the budget, currently we have requirements that are there and allocations that are here. There is completely no connect between what our long-term integrated plan is for equipment procurement and what our financing is for that. So you need a tri-service chief who does the long-range planning and who reconciles the interests of the three services. Now the problem indeed is that no government so far has mustered the political will for this. Instead, what do they do? They go and ask their defense secretary or their cabinet secretary and so on. And the answer is, a tri-service chief will be far too powerful. We don't want to imbue our military with such power. And then if they really want to strike home the point, they say, you see what happened next door in Pakistan. And that's basically the end of that discussion. I was speaking to a defense secretary, one of our best defense secretaries, in my opinion, in recent times. And he said that the group of ministers report that calls for a tri-service chief basically says subject to political availability, political agreement amongst the various parties. So this defense secretary tells me, as long as I can ensure that there is no complete political consensus on this, as long as I can go and tell the Prime Minister or the Defense Minister that the Republican Party of India Khobragade group is not agreeing to the tri-service chief, my job is done. So the fact is that it's not really, that people don't understand the situation. It's just very unpalatable to act on. So let's get on to the issue of conflict. Having sort of spoken so much about the lack of likelihood, I should say, of conflict, let's talk about what happens if conflict actually happens. How could that happen? What are the scenarios in which our defense planners are perceiving the possibility of a conflict? Now, with Pakistan, there are basically two scenarios in the planning paradigm. The first eventuality, which is not likely but nevertheless possible, is a land grab by Pakistan in Jammu and Kashmir. They've done it before. They did it in 47, 48. They did it in 65. They did it in Kargil in 1999. You would know that the India-Pakistan border exists in three forms, basically. The vast majority of it in Gujarat, Rajasthan, Punjab, and so on, is called international border agreed by India and Pakistan. There's no sort of contest about it. We've had our disagreements and so on, but both sides basically agree this is a settled border. Then you have the line of control, which is about 776 kilometers in Jammu and Kashmir, where you have had a lot of fighting and you have exchanged, sort of gone back and forth. The front line has gone back and forth, but now we are governed by a 1972 map that actually divides the border along a particular line, and both sides have agreed that we will not intrude or ingress across the other side. So that's also basically a settled border. And when you try and unsettle it, like it happened in Kargil, there's going to be war and it will be restored to what it was agreed in 1972. And then you have what is called the actual ground position line, which is the Wild West in Siachen. There's no agreement. Nobody knows where the border is. We know, of course, because our troops are over there. But nobody outside the military knows. And whatever you grab, you can keep over there. So that's probably one of the most unstable places over there. So basically, any land grab in J&K will lead to an escalation. If you hear about a permanent ingress into Indian territory or a permanent ingress of India into Pakistan, it's a pretty good indicator that things are going badly wrong. The second eventuality, which is more plausible today, is a major Pakistani-based terror attack. I didn't say Pakistani supported. It's enough now that it was sort of originated from Pakistan on a major symbolic target. Small targets we've become quite used to. Pathankot, you come in, kill 6 soldiers, go somewhere else, kill 10 people. This has now become par for the course. But let's say there's an attack on, just to choose a random example, Vaishno Devi temple in near Nagrota in Jammu. That would seriously contradict a red line. Or let's say there was a political assassination. Somebody got killed, one of our big national leaders. There would be repercussions over there. These are still triggers with Pakistan for a war. So far, India has shown remarkable restraint. There has been a lot of threat. There has even been deployment, but India has never actually gone to war on them, except on that one occasion in Kargil, and even that was a very limited war. You have this sort of strange situation with Pakistan where there is this constant threat of war, but Pakistan doesn't believe that that threat of war is real, which is why a lot of these terror attacks keep taking place. And Pakistan's only real sort of concern about these terrorist attacks is they should not cross that red line where it becomes unacceptable to India. Otherwise, the game goes on. Now, what has India done to try and convince Pakistan that its threat is real? When it says there could be war, Pakistan needs to take it seriously. It instituted a doctrine called cold start. Cold start basically means that it won't be like it was after the parliament attacks when it took us 3 weeks to build up our troops. Now we'll launch war within 48 hours of the attack when you're not ready to receive it. So Pakistan sort of thought about this, and it seemed fairly plausible to Pakistan. So they instituted they modified their nuclear doctrine and sort of created what they call tactical nuclear weapons, which means that the minute you cross the border, we will fire the small little nuclear weapon, not a very big nuclear weapon. Don't take it badly. It's a small nuclear weapon because you've just done a small little attack, and things will be normal as well. The international community will intercede. You can't have a nuclear conflagration between India and Pakistan, and things will be well. So we're back to where we were really. Pakistan doesn't believe that we're going to attack it in any serious way, and India believes that it has been successfully deterred by these nuclear weapons. So let's get to China. The Pakistan conflict is, despite all the talk, all the political rhetoric, all the stuff that you hear on television and so on, this is the reality on the ground. That India has a record of a remarkable restraint, that when we have tried to push that restraint with cold start, we have been effectively deterred with tactical nuclear weapons. Now, China, or sort of creating the illusion of the possibility of a war with China, was important for the military, because that would allow it to expand divisions, to expand its deployment in the northeast and along the Himalayan border. And as we all know, every military likes to expand. Every organization likes to expand. So basically, it created 3 scenarios, and these are the official scenarios for war with war with China, beg your pardon. The first likelihood is an unintended flare-up which sort of originated from a patrol violation on the border. You saw what happened in the Depsang intrusions in 2013, April-May 2013. The Chinese border guards came in, set up camp and so on for a while. We managed to resolve it without a serious problem. We had another intrusion in Chumar in September 2014. These incidents were resolved through diplomatic military crisis management, but Indian generals have been arguing that the depth of Chinese intrusions and the duration that they go on for has been increasing, and that increases the likelihood of escalation. What I do, I'm not quite sure I agree with any of this, but what I do agree with and what I find worrying is that the border populations have increased. There are more people on the border who actually live there. There are now journalists who actually go there and can report from there. So there's consequently greater media attention. And this greatly complicates the resolution of these face-offs. So far, we have never had a shot fired on the border. When 2 patrols of the Indian and Chinese armies come face to face, there's this very elaborately choreographed drama that plays out. This is all specified in a document called Standard Operating Procedure 2005. First, the Indian patrol or the Chinese patrol, one of them will unfurl a flag that says in Hindi, English, and Chinese that this is our territory, please go back. Then the other side will unfurl a flag saying, this is our territory, please go back. And then you can do this twice. You can wave your flag at the other side twice, and then both sides have to turn around and go back. So it doesn't sound like really, you could have a great big war, but it is one of the scenarios out there. The second anticipated scenario for a Sino-Indian face-off arises from China's growing presence in Gilgit-Baltistan, in POK. Pakistan had ceded 5,000 square kilometers over there a long while ago in 1963, but nothing much happened there. That was a remote valley. But now creating this One Belt, One Road initiative, creating the China-Pakistan economic corridor and so on, China for the first time can be sort of at least considered to have real, vital national interests at stake in Pakistan. And therefore, something that India does in respect to Pakistan could be seen by China as a sort of an assault on its vital interests. And Pakistan can be counted upon to do some creative management over here of an illusion of an Indian threat. So there is a sort of a little cause for concern over there, some intelligent orchestration by Pakistan to trigger a full-blown confrontation between India and China. And thirdly, drawing on history, which is always a very dangerous thing to draw on because you can draw whatever lessons you like. Indian generals have argued that out of 16 great power transitions over the preceding 500 years, I don't know when they got the time to calculate this, only 4 have been peaceful. But this is the official line sold to the MOD. Out of 16 great power transitions, only 4 have been peaceful. So the possibility of China's rise will be accompanied by the possibility of armed war. So it is a bit unconvincing. It's like saying that China is in Chanakya's inner mandal and therefore, there has to be a war. Chanakya said so. Or even better, conflict is in the nature of man. So the military likes having these reasons. Now, what is Mr. Modi doing about this? What is his foreign policy emphasis with respect to Pakistan, more so in the aftermath of Pathankot? The truth is that we don't have a national foreign policy towards Pakistan. We don't even have a BJP policy and a Congress policy. What we have is a government policy and an opposition policy. Whichever party is in the government behaves, it realizes that there are serious limitations on what you can do with Pakistan. It behaves in a certain way. And the opposition, completely irresponsibly, of course, beats the drums and says, you guys are a bunch of complete sissies, you're not doing what needs to be done. Having just been in government themselves, or knowing that you're going to be in government yourself very sooner. So the reality is that there is, it does not allow us to make war with Pakistan. The domestic rhetoric does not allow us to make peace with Pakistan. So we are caught between the reality and the rhetoric. We just continue in this ugly stability that continues between the two countries. So currently, after posturing over the Hurriyat meetings, terror attacks and so on, there is a period of understanding. The rhetoric between India and Pakistan after the Pathankot attack was completely remarkable for how civilized it was. There was not the usual accusations, threats, and so on. And it certainly makes me wonder that is there some agreement behind the scenes that is driving us towards dialogue in a particular way. We will see this play out in the future. I think that it really needs to be watched carefully. The gut feeling I have, and my gut feelings are almost invariably wrong, is that there is something cooking between India and Pakistan. There is some sort of agreement in making things a little better between Mr. Modi and Mr. Sharif, as including the Pakistan army. Now, what will always remain the point to watch in Pakistan is what is the military doing to crack down on India-focused groups. There has been no hard action yet. Whatever action has been taken against the Jaish-e-Mohammed is sort of cosmetic. But the security establishment finds it inconvenient to have to defend the pro-establishment jihadis like the LAT and the Jaish-e-Mohammed when they are, and this is extremely important, they are no longer sure of their loyalty. The the rhetoric that is being taken over in the jihadi space, that is taking over the jihadi space, is the rhetoric of pan-Islam, is the rhetoric of the Ummah, is the rhetoric that paints the Pakistani government as trustworthy, perhaps as untrustworthy, perhaps even more so than the Indian government. So I don't think that the Pakistan army is at all pleased about that. I think it's watching, from what I understand, very carefully, and there will be a reconsideration in Islamabad. Sartaj Aziz had an interview the other day, and he said, we are going sequentially, we will come and roll up these people. Now, Pakistan, you can't take it at its word, but certainly it's worth a watch. However, India can, of course, ensure the worst possible outcome, that Pakistan military continues its patronage of the jihadis, and all that we have to do is to keep publicly and stridently demanding action. Because the one way that Pakistan cannot take action is if India is demanding action. It cannot be seen to be bowing down to Indian diktat. So what we are seeing right now squares with this theory of mine that the lower sort of levels of stridency in the demands for action and so on suggests that it's worth watching to see what would happen. Before I finish, let me put in a quick word about the defense procurement procedure before we go on to the Q&A. The DPP is, of course, a rule book that seeks to lay down a procedure which, if followed in letter and spirit, will shield a bureaucrat or decision maker from subsequent harassment and investigation by George Fernandez's famous 3 Cs. That's the CBI, the CVC, and the CAG. But in that noble intention of the DPP lies the recipe for failure. Because when the pursuit of personal safety becomes a prime objective of a procurement, one can never feel safe enough to take the bold decisions that are required in defense procurement. The DPP tries to remove all subjectivity from equipment procurement decisions. Sadly, it's not possible to do so. Because defense decisions, and more importantly, modern defense platform decisions, are inherently subjective. There are few combat platforms that are optimized for everything at all. Building a high-performance military system is about trade-offs in one dimension of performance in order to achieve a better performance in another dimension. And when you're evaluating, you have to, at some level, make a decision that do I want this dimension or do I want that one? An army tank, for example, and that's something I've driven all my life, it can never be optimized for everything. If it's optimized for crew protection, all that heavy armor that you add on impedes its mobility. It can't move fast enough. So these decisions that you're going to have to make, or that the bureaucracy or the procurement machinery is going to have to make, is going to be inherently subjective. And if you're waiting for that purely objective decision, then you will continue, as we have continued thus far, searching for the appropriate clause, asking the right questions and so on, and never actually going ahead with that procurement. So what I'm saying is that producing newer and better DPPs is not the answer to speeding up procurement. Instead, the answer is to actually create a well-informed, empowered group of acquisition experts who take the procurement decisions, who are protected from accusations of malafide, because at the end of the day, accusations of malafide can be raised for any defense buy at all, no matter how transparently it's done. That said, Mr. Parikar's new DPP, which was sort of outlined by him, it's still to be officially published, it was outlined by him on January the 11th. It has certain praiseworthy initiatives. There is a new top priority procurement category termed Indian Design, Development and Manufacture, IDDM, very cumbersome label, but you're not going to get elegant from the Ministry of Defense, which requires vendors to offer equipment that is not just manufactured in India, but is also designed and built in the country. Now, this represents a late realization by the Ministry of Defense that Make in India is just an empty slogan. It is far more important to design and develop a platform, to integrate foreign systems if necessary, subsystems, so that it can work, all those systems can work together as a lethal battle platform. That involves a lot of software integration and a lot of hardware engineering. It's, you hear the uninformed say, for example, look at the Tejas fighter, it's 90% foreign parts. Yes, 90% foreign parts, but the engineering that brings those foreign parts together and makes it an Indian machine is all Indian. And that's what counts. So you can build, that allows you to build platforms that suits India's geography, soldiery, tactical requirements, and so on. And most importantly, it ensures or places you in a good position to do life cycle support. For most equipment that you buy, 1/10 of the cost is acquisition cost. 9/10 of the cost is incurred as servicing, maintenance, overhaul, upgrade, operating costs, and so on. So for that 1/10 of a cost, you actually allow that to drive the whole procedure. So what we're really talking about is when you're assembling a platform in India, if you're just ticking the Make in India box, that we'll assemble it in India, all you're doing is really promoting screwdriver assembly. Real defense indigenization lies in designing and development. So with this new IDDM category, the defense minister is incentivizing the defense industry, which has so far, through all policies and through this Make in India slogan, been focused on licensed screwdriver manufacture. It wants to direct it into the higher tech realm of designing and developing Indian weaponry. I have a lot of facts and figures regarding all these DPPs and so on, but I think I'll just leave it here because people are not interested in facts and figures so much as the larger issues, I think. I'll open this up to Q&A now, and if there's anything that I can clarify.
Thank you, Colonel Ajai Shukla. That was a great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Questions from the audience? Yes, go ahead, sir. We'll just wait for the mic, sir. First row.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. This great power theory, or that rise of a great power cannot be peaceful, was, I think, the first that I saw it was John Mearsheimer almost 15 years back, and structural realism. And from what I know now, very many countries in Asia Pacific are coming to believe it. Now, if I take his structural realism and Kenneth Walt's classical realism, to me it appears that the policy which Pakistan is following towards India, barring nuances and tactics, and China is following towards India, are quite logical. So therefore...
Just repeat that last part again. What is logical?
The policies which Pakistan, we tend to believe that the policy which Pakistan is following towards India is only because they have a rogue army. If I go by structural realism or even classical realism, my view is that make their army professional, you're not going to have a very significant change in Pakistan's policy towards India. Forget terrorism, it will change different forms. Therefore, isn't it imperative for India to be on the guard against both of these countries? That's question A. Question B is, are we now seeing foreign promoted warfare moving from overt to covert to foreign-inspired social warfare in India as a security threat?
Okay. We take one question at a time? Okay.
Your choice, sir.
Yeah, this business of great power rising and so on. I am not saying that the rising great power, China, will not be an aggressive power. I'll say that if it is an aggressive power, it is not because of some historical determinism that all great powers are rising, all rising powers are aggressive powers. It's because China, in a particular context, tends to be an aggressive power. I don't think anybody would disagree with you and say that China is mild or that China is not sort of flexing its muscles in the Asia Pacific and so on. Of course it is. Also, to answer your first question, I don't sort of recommend or advocate that we lower our guard against Pakistan and China, not for a minute. I have no rosy-eyed illusions about our neighbors. What I am advocating is that we certainly don't see that as the sole threat, and certainly perhaps not even as the primary threat. We see that as one of the threats that we have to guard against. But we have to take note of the fact that terrorism is a far more immediate, frequent, and a real threat to us on a day-to-day basis. that issues like cybersecurity, issues like caste manipulation, issues like education and so on, these must form a part of our security matrix. This is not something that we can say, as long as the forge is there, good boys, there 3 guys got killed in Kashmir today, what heroes. You have to have a cold-eyed, realistic evaluation of what constitutes security, what are the components, and how much space on that matrix each of those components occupies. And if you actually, if you were to ask me about if you marry the China threat with the likelihood of that threat materializing into war, I would say China occupies perhaps 1/10 the space on our security matrix as terrorism does. Pardon me if I was not able to convey myself correctly. I'm not saying we lower our guard against China and Pakistan. I'm just saying that we keep our eyes firmly focused on all the other elements of the threat matrix.
Can we have the mic to Swami Iyer? He'd like to ask a question. Anybody else? Just raise your hands, I'll get the mic sent to you. Yeah, next.
A few questions. Is some of this discussion so 20th century? In the 21st century, if everything in warfare is supposed to be done by cyber sabotage, that the Pakistan attempts to set off a missile and instead of landing in Delhi, it lands in Lahore because we managed to fix their missile by hacking into their system. If you're able to jam it and prevent it from going forward, I mean, these are the areas presumably where we already have, through our software, a major capacity that Pakistan does not and Pakistan will not be able to catch up with. And yet in the defense discussions, I never find any mention of this apparent superiority. What we have actually done, the one general I mentioned it who said no comment, suggesting that the issue has been thought about, but he's unwilling to say where exactly we are going on this. So I would like some idea of, is this an area of strength where we can assert ourselves in various ways? The second question is, with this collapse in the price of gas internationally, and the shale gas thing is not going to go away, all these pipelines that we have been talking about going through Pakistan, does it make sense or should we simply switch to imported liquid LNG? Does it make sense to go ahead with the other things anymore? The third is in terms of the retaliation. You say, what do we do in terms of retaliation? You did not mention what Mr. Parikar seemed to be hinting at of assassination capacity. Parikar hasn't said it openly, but he said we are going to be more aggressive than the previous government. And the hint almost is some kind of covert operations within Pakistan as a form of retaliation if there is something else like the attack on Bombay or the attack on Parliament. In your view, is it feasible and is it sensible? Because we open ourselves up to counter retaliation.
3 questions. So the first question you had was, those modern disruptive techniques of the kind that, the US DARPA sort of focuses on. Now, if you notice the statement that Modi made to the commanders, he's talking about this. He mentioned new ways of fighting, new methods of war, and so on. But the fact of the matter is that in our planning circles, we are not focusing adequately on these methods. I was having chai with a general the other day, and he was preparing a speech that he had to give for them. He was preparing a speech in the Indian Army. The general is preparing a speech. Means there's some lieutenant colonel in the next office who's actually preparing the speech. So that guy phoned him up. He said, this is ready, you want to see it? So he says, oh, cyber dal diya hai? So he said, हाँ डाल दिया. Okay, ठीक है फिर. So as long as you've paid lip service to, some of these new age threats, it's believed to be adequate. We have still not reached the stage of seriously pursuing disruptive warfare, of seriously pursuing new ways of fighting and so on. I think that the army is absolutely, and in every country, the most conservative organization there is. This kind of leadership, thought leadership, has to come from outside. But our army, I'm afraid, is matched by our strategic community. They all tend to be extremely, restrained and low-key and so on, and not many of them know about military. They're basically diplomats in any case. So to answer your first question, no, missile coming to Delhi will land on Delhi only. Unless, assuming the Pakistanis have got it right. Collapse in the price of gas and pipelines through Pakistan. This is literally a multi-billion-dollar question. I would completely advocate doing it. Because in whatever way, even at the cost of a few billions, which is not really, the last thing that's going to destroy the Indian economy, if you create stakeholders and constituencies in Pakistan, you're broadly doing the right thing. So I think even if that results in sporadic supply of gas, whether it results in attacks on the gas and so on, you will find the Pakistani state being incentivized to act against the people who are disrupting those supplies and doing it. It's creating the constituencies that you actually want to create in Pakistan, and therefore anything that has to do with business, with the supply of petrochemicals, with trade, with commerce, I would advocate going in for it regardless of the possible economic cost and the losses that could accrue. As far as retaliation is concerned, now first of all, as a disclaimer, Parrikar he's not the most responsible speaker. He shoots off his mouth. He has given numerous statements on numerous things which he has backtracked from So the statement about whether he was actually talking about creating an assassination capability or a sort of a counter-terror, matching terror for terror response, or he was just flexing his muscles in public, I'm not too sure. I will only leave you with the thought that there are many capabilities that we already have and which are not spoken about in public, but which are exercised from time to time. We certainly haven't got the capability of fomenting terrorism within Pakistan on a sustained basis. And it will take us a great deal of time to do it after the raw assets were wound up in Pakistan as a result of the Gujarat Doctrine in the 1990s. There was mass-scale deaths of Indian spies in Pakistan because all the networks were rolled up. To get those back into place, to start playing that game with Pakistan will take us a long time. And if you were to ask me as an individual whether we should do it, I don't think we should do it. We've got enough problems of our own, rather than having to deal with this.
Yes, so hand up there. We'll just send you the mic so the rest of the hall can hear you. Were some of your questions answered? Well, both were asked and answered. Okay, then can we bring the mic? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for the wonderful talk. I just had 3 questions. One was on Bangladesh. We didn't discuss Bangladesh on this talk, but for some reason I think that's a place which is getting more and more radicalized every day of the year. And what should be the strategy there? And is it influenced by China and, of course, not Pakistan maybe? And second question is on the raw agents that you said, the activities are rolled off in Pakistan, but Pakistan always accuses India of activities in Balochistan. So do you really think we have the ability to create a stir in Balochistan? And thirdly, we have the ability to send a mission to Mars, but for some reason we are not able to develop our own weapons in India, and we really depend on countries like Israel to support us with their technology. So do you think, is it like we are too procurement happy in the defense because of which we are not really making an effort to develop in India, or is it something else?
Okay.
Thanks.
Bangladesh, getting more and more radicalized. Firstly, there are 2 views on that. There's sort of a strong view that Sheikh Hasina's crackdown on the Jamaat-e-Islami and so on is bringing radicals to book. She's executed a couple of them. The one thing that India should not do is to be seen to be overtly interfering or promoting a certain line in domestic politics of any of its neighbors. Every time we've done that, whether it's Maldives, whether it's Nepal, whether it's Myanmar, whether it's Bangladesh, we've gone wrong. Because we are suffering from the big country syndrome. Whatever we do will be seen as aggressive, interfering, undesirable, and so on. So I think we have a fairly good equation going on between the government of India and the government of Bangladesh. For a long time, we have not had the problems of insurgents being provided support and so on by their agencies. So I think with Bangladesh, best to keep things on an even keel, continue confidence building measures with that country and so on. It's one of those countries where India is not seen as a very bad power. Certainly not to the extent it is in Pakistan, and even I would say Sri Lanka views us somewhat better than Bangladesh does. As for raw agents and activities in Balochistan goes, Pakistani accusations notwithstanding, we don't have any raw agents in Balochistan, I can tell you that. What we do have is supported insurgent leaders. It's easy to fiddle around with what's going on in Pakistan. Just call a guy to Dubai, give him a suitcase full of money. They're doing it for themselves. And Pakistan's military is so bad at handling these things, internal security threats, that they can be completely relied upon and counted upon to make the situation worse. So we don't have to do anything in Balochistan. In fact, anybody that we deal with and it becomes known, it's the kiss of death. So, Pakistan is constantly trying to deal with these people who it hates, by labeling them Indian agents. Why should we help them in that? As far as mission to Mars and countries like Israel go, that's a crucial question, central question you put your finger on. And the reason is simply that we have a government that believes that, as long as you step back, don't interfere in the functioning of the defense industry and so on, toss out a few Make in Indias every speech that you give, you're doing the right thing. But in fact, defense industry, like no other industry, requires very careful nurturing and cultivation. The government is the sole customer. The government has to also be the market maker. It has to allocate responsibilities. It has to make sure that, each private company is working in a realm of technology excellence that it can best handle. It has to arrange for funding for those, even if it's not giving out the funding, at least easy term loans and so on. There is no inclination, there is no sign of this happening at all. So I remain pessimistic about the defense industry. There are some very good companies who are doing very good work, but it's entirely without the sort of help and assistance and coordination of the government.
Okay, we need to end this session. We're almost out of time. Colonel Shukla, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for the questions and thank you for taking.